Dogman versus the six-fingered swamp booger. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Hey, I saw a cryptid fight once a long time ago. I'd like to tell you the story, and I haven't told it on YouTube before. If you don't use it, tell me so I can send it somewhere else. But if you do use it, feel free to fix it up or correct the grammar, but don't change the parts about the monsters. Or if you do need to change things, let me see them first, and let me okay it before you record the show. Even though I'm not going to put my name on it at the request of my daughter, I still want to make sure the details are gotten correct. Now, the two cryptids I saw having a fight of some kind about 15 or 20 years ago were a Bigfoot and a dogman or werewolf, or something that looked like a dogman or werewolf at least. Both creatures stood up like men, and neither one was playing around when they were arguing. It was some kind of very serious fight, and they didn't seem to like each other in the slightest. Both of them wanted to hurt the other one, but each of them also clearly had a healthy fear of the other, and so they spent the majority of the event screaming, posturing, and throwing things from a relatively safe distance before tempers started to flare even hotter than that previous boiling point. I can also tell you pretty much exactly where my sighting took place, because it started off with me and two of my buddies trying to scare each other by going up to a crybaby bridge. Now, I don't think this is a real crybaby bridge. I just made it up to scare the other two, because I had the keys to my parents' car that night, and it was a winter vacation night, so we could stay up late. My two friends, who I will call Nestor and Lester, were 17, as I was, and they were all sleeping over at our place, while my parents slept over at their friend's party. Now, I had never asked for permission to go legend tripping looking for ghosts. I know that my parents left me the older car so that I could get food and in case of an emergency, not for joyriding. But they never specifically said that we couldn't go looking for ghosts under a bridge, so I said, let's go have some fun. Where Walsh Road goes over Arms Creek. That's where I decided there would be a legend attached of a woman who lost her baby there to the tide back years ago when it was a wooden-covered bridge. Now, I don't actually know if it ever was a wood-covered bridge, but I bet there used to be a wooden bridge there, so the story made sense to me. But when we got to the spot, Nestor and Lester were disappointed and skeptical. They asked where the bridge was, and I pointed to the creek going under the road. Nestor was like, "That's not a bridge. That's a road going over a creek." Lester pointed out that a road going over a creek is by definition a bridge, and Nestor had no wind left in his sails. Still, neither of them found a road going over a creek to be scary, even there in the woods in the middle of the night. Nestor said he was expecting some kind of larger body of water. That didn't look to him like it was enough water to drown a fly, let alone someone's brat. But we all soon quieted down when we started to hear very soft sounds that seemed as though they might be much louder sounds if we were closer to them. Not sounds of a crying baby. These were percussive sounds. You could feel them in the soles of your feet. It felt like something terrible was happening somewhere off in that forest. Shutting up, we all wandered over toward the wood line, listening to an awful and arrhythmic combination of deep percussive sounds which seemed to be getting progressively louder. We started quietly arguing about what that tearing sound was that we were hearing, when Nestor pointed at the sight of the tops of tall trees in the distance, swaying violently, and a cloud of dust rising from out there. The three of us turned to run away, just as the woods exploded open, one tree getting partially uprooted, as two big dark monsters scrambled out of the woods, running over and past us, as we feebly attempted to run away from them. 1 second they were behind us, the next they were over us, and then off they went into the woods on the other side of the road, each trying to hurt the other one, both of them seeming to be simultaneously the attacker and the prey being pursued. I saw one chasing the other. Then he ran right past him and was suddenly being chased. It was the most manic and insane conflict I've ever witnessed. And I once attended WrestleMania in person, so I know all about live fighting events. This was the biggest one of all time, or at least the two fighters, were the biggest any of the three of us had ever seen going at it. So my two friends and I ran off into the woods after this insanity, which I still can't believe each time I think back on it. I certainly wouldn't do that again if it happened now. But we were 17, unmarried, no jobs, and we didn't have to get up the next morning. So somehow, we just wanted to see more of what those two big monsters were that ran past us. Now, each of the two of them was a different kind of a monster. We could see that right away. But they were both bigger than bears, and they both had such long legs. It was hard to believe there could be two different kinds of things like that in the world, when we had never thought of anything like that before. I forget if it was Nestor or Lester that called one of them a Bigfoot, and a light went off over my head. It was more like a man than the other one. What would you call that one with the tall ears? I remember asking nobody in particular, and both of my friends immediately said that was the Michigan Dogman. Like, they both already had a context to understand what was happening, while I was still at the stage of wondering what I was looking at. And it made sense, their framework, I mean. The one must be a Bigfoot, and the other must be a Dogman. Suddenly what was happening was defined, and made sense, even though it really only opened up more questions, because then you gotta ask, well, what is a Bigfoot? And what really is a Dogman? Because apparently I saw one of each, and I can't tell you for certain what that was that I saw. I'm certain I saw them fighting though. The three of us ran as hard as we could after the creatures, who had to be more than twice our size. The only reason we saw them at all, though, was because they stopped and fought in a clearing. If they had kept running, they would have been out of our range in under a minute, because their legs were so long, and they were so incredibly powerful and fast. That's another thing I mentioned earlier in passing, but I really should go back to and emphasize. These things were all legs, and they also had very long arms. Although they were mainly what I would call bipedal or upright, I do remember seeing them scrambling around on the ground under each other at points. They were not above crawling if it got the job done, just as they were not above violence when scare tactics failed, if you catch my drift. I never really saw two fighters of any species who seemed both more frightened of or angrier at each other. There were points where one or the other clearly could have made a break for it and run off, yet neither ever did. We stopped to catch our breaths at one point, while the two big smelly behemoths pummeled each other with fists that looked awfully human to me. Especially the big skinny Bigfoot, who was more human than I expected a Sasquatch to be. The thing is, Lester noticed this first. His hands seemed to have too many fingers. It looked to me like 6 fingers on each hand, and by that I mean 5 fingers and 1 thumb on each. It might have even been 7, but we all agreed that night that he had 6 fingers. It was dark, so it might have been an illusion, but is that part really so much harder to believe than any of the rest of this? Something about the 6-fingered part hit a chord with me, and I did look into it a little bit. There are stories of giants with 6 fingers in various old world traditions, including the Bible. I don't recall them being described as covered in black fur as this creature we were witnessing was, but I wonder if Bigfoot might be descended from some of these giants, or if maybe they both had a common ancestor possibly. I guess it also might have been a fluke or a mutation that gave him the polydactylism, as I think they call it. At least that's what my mom used to say about her cat, that it had polydactylism with too many fingers. The thing is, my mom's cat's paws looked wrong. This Bigfoot's hands looked fine and not malformed. They just had one extra finger on each hand. I wonder if we could have looked in his mouth if we would have seen double rows of teeth, like they talk about in the old stories of giants. By the way, those giant legends are not limited to Europe and the Middle East. There are American legends of giants that were told to the Europeans when they arrived. These six-fingered big guys seem to have gotten around, even if we don't know where they've gone to more recently. Some people do suggest that they may have devolved into the kind of ugly mud-covered swamp booger that we were seeing holding his own against that equally giant dog-headed kind of monster that was trying to tear the Squatch's neck right open. I ran what I've written so far past Nestor and Lester, and they both insist that these monsters were 14 or 15 feet tall. Now that just looks stupid when I see it typed out. Nothing is that tall. Nothing. They must have been more like 11 or 12 feet tall, since that just sounds more logical to me in my head. I mean, who would believe me if I said 14 or 15 feet tall? But I do remember them being taller than any kind of land animal I can think of. Well, I guess maybe an elephant is taller than they were. But what walks on two legs and gets that tall? Absolutely nothing does. In either case, we could have ducked and run between either monster's legs, so they were very tall, and they were very leggy. In the Booger's sense, I'd say that sort of gave him the look of a basketball player with a bad temper and a lot of mud all over him. The Dogman or werewolf, on the other hand, was all swole, like a steroid freak. He looked like he could bench press Cleveland and use Earth's moon as a medicine ball. He had muscles that would make Schwarzenegger go wow. I don't know that he was actually any stronger or faster than the Bigfoot, but he sure looked more impressive to the eye in that sense. He looked like he was ready for a fight, whereas the Bigfoot looked like he was ready to hide behind a tree and peek out at someone. I guess the different survival strategies led to different body builds. So I can't remember if I mentioned this before, but there was a long period of them circling each other and faking each other out, before all of a sudden, bam! Both sides were snarling and baring teeth and going for each other's throats. It was a really scary frenzy that even made me and my two friends turn around and find spots at a safer distance to watch from. The Dogman had been more inclined to tear at the Bigfoot with his claws than punch with his fists, as the Sasquatch seemed to prefer. But suddenly at that moment, any trace of humanity was stripped from that Bigfoot, and he bit at the other monster's throat as if he had never been anything more than an animal in the first place. The Wolfman tried to tear the Sasquatch's eyes out, but the Bigfoot grabbed him by both wrists and squeezed them hard, forcing the Dogman down onto his knees in front of him. The Bigfoot got 3 successive sharp knees to the face in before the surprised Dogman was able to react by snapping at his legs, scoring 2 bites before the next knee caught him square in the snout, losing at least one of his teeth from his jaw, sending it flying. Seizing the advantage, the Bigfoot leaped on top of the canine creature and seemed to be pummeling him, possibly for the final time. The 3 of us cautiously creeped a little closer, having a hard time seeing what was happening beyond the ever-growing dust cloud that the fight was generating. Suddenly there was a squeal or a howl that almost deafened me, as one of those animals was in extreme pain. We couldn't even tell which one it was, but we were too scared to move forward into the smoky area, knowing that the visibility in there was down to almost nothing. We didn't have to worry for long, though, as soon the fight brought itself to us. Out of the trees burst the Sasquatch, making that noise again. The Dogman had scored a blow back there, although I don't know exactly what happened. The Bigfoot seemed to want to get away, He had finally had enough. It looked as though he was going to run past us to our right, but the dogman leaped and grabbed him from behind, with the altered momentum, sending both monsters careening off balance, directly toward where the three of us had been watching. I remember time slowing down, and I remember feeling like it was 9/11, and one of the towers was falling behind me. I was running, and I couldn't look back, because the entire building was going to collapse on top of me if I did. When the monsters fell on top of each other behind me, it sounded like slow-motion sound effects to me. I saw my two friends in front of me turn to look back, but I just kept running past them until I tripped and fell down, gasping for air. Now the two monsters were on the ground on top of each other, rolling and rolling as dust rose up and made it harder to breathe than to see, which wasn't easy. We were coughing violently now, and so we were no longer able to disguise our positions to the creatures. We all ran as well as we could, coughing and retching and gasping for oxygen, as we continued to try to get away from the epicenter of all this insanity. I could hear the dogman's growls, and I could hear the Sasquatch's exclamations of pain, sounding almost human, but not quite. It was a terrible thing to be hearing, and it made me feel nauseous, and like I had to go to the bathroom. Lester shouted, "There's the car," and my eyes lit up. I had forgotten that we had a car. I had forgotten we were in the 21st century. I think I must have been in some state of trauma or shock or something. But when I saw my parents' old beat-up heap parked on the grass near that little bridge overpass, it felt like Christmas times 12. I jumped in and started the engine, and I almost backed over Lester, who hadn't gotten inside yet. Rather than apologize, I shouted at him to move faster, and we got the heck out of Dodge while we could. The two of them were in the back seat, and they were claiming they could see the dust cloud from the road. It was a bright night, so maybe they really could. Stuff like this only could happen on a full moon night, or something close to the full moon. Not only does it make it light enough for something like this to go on, but that moon makes the animals and the people alike just a little bit more high-strung. It's like giving everybody 6 cups of coffee to start their evening off with, you know? I made my friends swear to me that they wouldn't tell my parents or anyone where we went or what we did on that night. In fact, we stopped to get some food on the way back just so that I could at least explain some of the mileage we put on that old crate. I could already imagine the kind of lecture I would get for doing the kind of things we did on that night, and I don't ever want to hear that lecture in real life. And how could I defend leaving my parents' car parked along the side of the forest road at night, just because I felt like running into the woods to see? Dogman versus the 6-fingered swamp booger. Say, did you know that you can send us a donation right here on YouTube? Well, you can, just by clicking on that thanks button under each of our videos. Mary Anderson did just that, and this is why she's today's executive producer. Thank you, Mary, we really appreciate it. Another way to help the channel out and get something cool in return is to get yourself our cool new scary Dogman mug, perfect for your morning beverage. There's a link in the description to find out more. And it's possible that an image of the mug might be appearing directly under this video, if all the stars have aligned. You should be able to click on that and go right to the page for the mug, where you can decide if you want one for yourself. We also take requests if any of you want some specific thing on some merch. There are lots of other ways to help the show out. Here to tell you all about them is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.